In today's video, we're going to go over the best race and class combinations in vanilla WoW, and what class maximizes their race's potential as much as possible. Starting off with the Alliance and working our way down. Keep in mind, Druid is not going to be in this video, as only one race on both the Horde and Alliance can be them, and this video is being made with both PvE and PvP comparisons, and we'll be discussing both as much as possible. Starting off with everyone's favorite pet tamer, the Hunter. When taking a look at all of the playable races that could even be a Hunter on Alliance, you had Dwarves and Night Elves. And while neither of these races had good active racials for PvE, few races did. However, the racials were very good for PvP, like the Dwarves' Stone form because of how it removed all poisons, bleeds, and diseases. But more importantly, allowed the Dwarf to break out of a Rogue's blind, with Night Elves having their Shadow Mail to go invisible, and with both of them having their own resistances as well. However, the Dwarves being arguably better here, as Frost Mages were very popular during this time, and being able to potentially resist a Frostbolt could mean victory. But Night Elves also being able to resist nature damage could make them stronger against things like Shaman's Earthshock, Lightning Bolt, or a Druid's Thorns or Wrath, for example. For the PvP side of things, they were both equally strong, with Dwarves pulling through just a tiny bit more in this regard. For PvE content, the difference between these two races is very minor, and in an unstated passive effect with Night Elves, they have the highest base agility in the game because they start off with an extra 9 points of agility for a total of 22 agility, while Dwarves only had 16. Though Dwarves did start off with gun specialization. While Hunters rarely had guns as their BIS weapon, this does mean you could get more use out of those weapons, allowing you to gain more benefit from the items usually ignored by other Hunters. And the Night Elf agility bonus squeezes out just that much more with its very tiny damage increase no matter what range weapon they had. Even still, both of these races are very close to each other, and you're better off playing whichever you like the most. If you want to be ridiculously good looking though, you might want to be a dwarf. Next up we have the Mage. Gnomes are the way to go for this class. Humans did not offer up much in the ways of the Mage, and this is because it was just sword and mace specializations, which the Mage didn't need. Their perception practically had no use in PvE, and although it was rather good in PvP, to prevent rogues and feral druids from getting the jump on you, which is a big threat to them. And while the human spirit increased their spirit by 5%, this only gave them a tiny boost to mana generation. But it still had, minor uses in PvP and PvE, mainly to increase the time before they had to sit and drink from blizzard farming, or give them some amount of mana back between fights and battlegrounds. Also of note, because of diplomacy granting 10% more reputation, if getting to max rep faster to unlock powerful items is more important to you, like say in a Season of Mastery, this is the go-to choice. Although this is more for people who are limited on time. So for any class that can be human, if time is important to you, this is the go-to race. The Gnome Mages being far better for PvE and PvP content because Expansive Mind increases their intellect by 5%. Which not only boosted their total mana, but also buffed their spell crit chance. Escape Artist is an amazing ability to have access to in PvP, allowing them to escape from effects like Entangling Roots or Improved Hamstring. And the Engineering specialization was also great to have, since Engineering is the best profession for mages to have. Now we have the Paladin. Paladin Vanilla wasn't the best class, but if for some reason you wanted to play this, then you have two races to choose from, being a Dwarf or a Human. So which of the two is better? Well, your best bet is choosing a human. And why is that? See, humans are significantly better for PvE due to their extra weapon skills, thanks to mace and sword specialization. Especially since there are plenty of amazing endgame swords like the Corrupted Ashbringer, and hammers like Sulfurous, Hand of Ragnaros. Higher weapon skills as a melee spec meant a lower chance to miss your attacks, have a glance, or be dodged. Diplomacy played a bigger part for paladins, because some of their best in slot gear required reputation checks, and allows them to get some of those BIS slots sooner than dwarves normally could. Dwarves, however, are better for PvP because of their stone form and frost resistance, but provided very little in regards to PvE content, outside of a few minor exceptions, like fighting Sapharion and Naxxramas, as he required frost resistance. But that one fight still made humans reign king because of their overall combat prowess, and frost resist gear could be obtained by every class, making humans once again the best choice for melee classes. If you're looking to heal as a paladin, the humans are better than dwarves due to their increase of spirit as well, meaning the human is the overall superior choice for paladins for both damage and healing if you decide to play this class. For our main healers in vanilla, Priest is a tough decision. The three races that could be a priest are humans, dwarves, and night elves, and all three had their own very strong racials. So, which is better? Well, this is between the humans and dwarves, as the night elves having Shadowmeld offered nothing in comparison to what humans and dwarves did. While each of these races had one different priest racial, feedback for humans and fear ward for dwarves, both of them having Desperate Prayer, a large instant cast self-heal. So, between these two, this is very difficult one to say, as they both had equal levels of worth in many different situations. Humans, having the increased 5% spirit stat, helped both their mana regeneration and your healing, as this stacked well with the spiritual guidance talent, which increased your spell damage and healing based on your total spirit, as well as the meditation talent, which lets you regen mana in combat. These three passives made this stat very important, especially for long fights, along with humans just having good overall stats, which made them great for really any class. And while feedback was strong, it required a niche opponent. So when you did get use of it, it was good, but that was rare. Dwarves, however, have Fear Ward, which allows them to place a buff on a teammate that will prevent the next fear effect on them and consume the ward in the process. This is an extremely useful spell in PvE, this being an alliance-defining mechanic even, leading to Alliance being by far the best raiding faction in vanilla, as this ability alone made many difficult fights far easier. And since dwarves are better than humans in PvP during this time, allowing them to use their Stone Form ability, they could use Stone Form to break out of a rogue's blind and then use their Desperate Prayer to heal themselves, and doing this could mean the difference between life and death. So, which is better for what activity? Well, if you're just looking for raw healing potential, PvE-wise, human is better. But for actual PvE, Fear Ward is just way too good to pass up, as many bosses love to cast Fear, and a quick way to wipe is for a tank to get feared. So, it's common to have Fear Ward up 100% of the time in the main tank, using multiple dwarves. And when it comes to PvP, dwarves and humans come neck and neck, with dwarves having good abilities to counter direct attacks, with humans having better healing and stealth detection. Rogues, for the class that people play if they hate themselves. The rogue is unique as every race in Alliance can play one. So, out of dwarves, gnomes, humans, and night elves, which is the best? For PvE content, humans without a doubt. Humans, once again, reign due to their mace and sword specialization, which, as mentioned earlier in the video, a higher weapon skill means a lower chance to miss, get a glancing blow, and lower chance to have your attacks be dodged, which for a rogue can increase their damage by a pretty significant amount. But what about PvP, you ask? Well, out of the races, the best one for PvP combat is gnomes. Although dwarves still have a fair bit of use, gnomes because of their escape artist ability. And since the best way to control rogue is just to use those effects, a gnome rogue can skip getting improved sprint in their talent trees, as this is basically a better version of it, and allows them to spec further into damaging ones instead, like Cold Blood for example, making them the kings of PvP. Dwarves still of course have their Stone Form, allow them to remove various dots that may normally prevent them from casting Vanish. Now, this isn't to say that picking a dwarf or a night elf is basically bad or anything, as you can absolutely play them if you wish to, but for a rogue specifically, you are losing out in damage by picking the other two races, and losing out on utility by picking them as well. And before we move on, if you want to farm gold using your rogue, the dwarf is a good option because of their ability to see treasures on the minimap, and paired with the rogue's ability to stealth and lockpick, this makes them a rather good gold maker. For the edgy players who want to summon demons and such, we have the Warlock. Now, humans and gnomes can both be warlocks, although to no one's surprise, gnomes are vastly superior casters than humans in this case as well, just like with the mages. As you guessed, because of the expansive mind racial. Intellect is a very important stat to warlocks, maybe even more so than for mages, as the mix of increased spell crit and mana pool is far more important to a class that relies on lots of spell crit, and also constantly consuming their HP to fill their mana. Another fact being that while warlocks are strong defensively compared to mages, they do not have the same means of escape like blink, freezes, or ice blocks, meaning in PvP they are rather easy to lock down with a rogue or warrior. Escape Artist comes in handy as an amazing counter to this. And lastly, engineering specialization is very good, as engineering is the best profession in the game for combat bonuses, especially DPS. And while for mages, humans are only a bit worse than mages, for warlocks, they are far worse. Demonic Embrace, a talent in the very first row of Demonology tree, more than almost every single warlock spec takes. It decreases your spirit by 5% and increases your stamina by 15%. Do I need to say more? a class that willingly reduces its spirit by 5%, playing a race that has a racial that increases their spirit by 5%. Spirit is by far the lowest stat for Warlocks, at least until Wrath of the Lich King, and I have a whole video on that if you're interested. For the warrior players out there, humans are the way to go, but all the other races can be what you're looking for. However, the reason humans rule PvE is because of their weapon specialization racials, as hitting with attacks is very important, but far more important for tanks especially, as warriors are the go-to tank. They need to be able to hit, both to generate aggro and of course to deal damage, both tanking and DPS. For PvP, however, gnomes and dwarves are strong competitors, with gnomes pulling ahead just that much more, since gnomes are able to remove movement impairing effects and stay within melee range to do damage far more often. As well as being just smaller to hit, which, believe it or not, is actually a very slight advantage in PvP. Dwarves having stone form, though, can provide them with extra armor, making them even more difficult to kill, even as a tank. But its main use is definitely around removing dots instead, which does make them decent flag carriers. However, with no real use for PvP, outside of maybe some niche situations, or acting as a tank, as long as you make up for the missing expertise. With Night Elves literally offering little to nothing for warriors, except maybe the memes of a stealth warrior in PvP. Now onto the Horde faction. Starting with the Hunter. With Orc, Tauren, and Troll being available to Hunters, all three of these races are solid choices, and bring their own unique utility to both PvE and PvP, with Trolls being the best in PvE and Orcs the better in PvP. In PvE content, Trolls with their Berserking caused them to attack much faster, and gave a significant more amount of damage output than any other Hunter race in the game, with Trolls also having the second highest base agility for Hunters, and with the Beast Slayer passive combined with their attack speed, made them pump out good consistent damage, with the 5% more damage to Beast not only useful while leveling, but also had multiple uses in Raid, with one major use in Molten Core on fights like Magmadar. But for PvP content, Orcs are by far the best race for PvP regarding Hunters, and almost overall, because of their hardiness racial. See, hardiness made them have a chance to resist all stun effects by 25%. Each race in the game has a baseline chance to resist stuns by 5%, and this stacked with the Orcs racial, which allowed Orcs to have a massive 30% chance to resist every stun of the game, which is incredibly powerful for PvP. It was so good, in fact, it got nerfed constantly in following expansions, to now, in retail, it just reduces the durations of stun slightly, rather than giving you a chance to negate the whole stun without resist. They also have Command, which is both a great damage boost to PvP and PvE content for your pet, but is kind of held back by the horrible pet AI, which is, funny enough, in some ways a benefit in PvP. With Taurens not having any racials that make them a good choice for PvE hunters, they do have very decent ones for PvP with War Stomp, which can be useful to get a melee character off you for a second and hopefully get a heal, or allow you to feign death and then use Freezing Trap, as you couldn't use traps during combat yet. Their endurance and nature resistance racials were good, but seen as health gain from endurance is very small and not too noticeable, and nature resistance having very small uses since shamans are the class with the most meaningful nature damage and they're on Horde, and fighting a shaman as a Horde member only happened in duels and not regular battlegrounds, but did help ever so slightly against Druids in some of their attacks. Now, with the Horde version of Mage, Trolls and Undead are able to be mages. Luckily, deciding what's best here is very easy, as Trolls are once again the best for PvE, but Undead are better for PvP. For the same reason Trolls are the best for Hunters in PvE combat, their racial Berserking is just simply too good to pass up, especially as a spellcaster because being able to cast faster is just a pure DPS increase. Along with their Beast Slaying passive helping mages the same as Hunters, while none of the other racials benefited the mage for the most part, except maybe regeneration just a tiny bit because of the passive health regeneration. For PvP combat, however, Undead characters are broken due to their Will of the Forsaken racial, as it allowed them to break free of all charm, fear, and sleep effects while it was active and lasted for 5 seconds. So compared to a regular insignia of the Horde, which has a 5-minute cooldown, and Will of the Forsaken having a 2-minute cooldown, it was a better PvP trinket. That you could also use alongside the PvP trinket, as these two things didn't share a cooldown in vanilla, allowing the Undead to basically get out of everything whenever it happened. The other racials, Cannibalize, could have niche use in PvP, if a 1v1 had happened and you can get a quick resource gain, or just use it to BM a player, which is how it was mostly used for PvP anyways. Their Shadow Resistance could also have use in PvP, seeing as Shadow Magic was also very popular to use. and the resistance could help that much more against a Warlock's dots. And since Warlocks are very popular during this time, this could come in handy more than once. Once again, the only two races that can be priests on Horde are Trolls and Undead. And both of their special priest abilities are Hex of Weakness and Shadow Guard for Trolls, and Devouring Plague and Touch of Weakness for Undead, as priests had their extra racials, remember. Hex of Weakness weakened the enemy it was used on, which reduced their damage for 2 minutes. This is actually pretty useful to just throw on a dungeon boss or even other players in PvP. Shadow Guard surrounded the user in shadow orbs that did a tiny bit of damage to anyone that hit them. It had 3 charges and lasted for 10 minutes. This is very similar to a Shaman's Lightning Shield and is actually kind of basically the same thing. Undead's Touch of Weakness is just a straight up better version of the Troll's ability, Hex of Weakness. Not only does it reduce their damage for the same duration, but it costs less mana to use, and makes them take a tiny amount of shadow damage when they use their next attack. However, what makes this ability nearly useless is the fact it requires the priest melee attack the enemy to activate it, while the troll version could simply be casted at range. Devouring Plague gave Undead Priests an instant ability that applied a decently damaging 24-second dot on a 3-minute cooldown, while also healing the caster for the damage dealt, and because of the significant mana cost, made it only really useful to Shadow Priests. So, which one's better? Well, Undead does have the highest base spirit in the game, which does help with their mana regeneration, as well as the aforementioned talents that increased healing based on your spirit, let you regen mana in combat, and of course, since mana regeneration is a pain to deal with, it does make a tiny difference. But for PvE and PvP healing content, Trolls still pull ahead because of the Berserking racial. It's quite undersaid that Berserking making you cast that much faster is such a difference for casters, especially as being able to cast spells, healing, or damage 10 to 30% faster is just dumb strong. But for PvP, Undead are a bit more powerful because of their defensive abilities. However, when it comes to Shadow Priests for PvP and PvE, Undead are well above Trolls. And while in original WoW Classic they would be shunned in any raid, in Season of Mastery with no debuff cap, it is very likely we will see some Shadow Priests in raids. This might be the only time in history that it's considered for vanilla era high-end PvE, and thus Devouring Plague might actually play a factor. Now for rogues on Horde, you have Orc, Undead, and Trolls available to you. Now this one is actually quite hard to label as the best, because all of these races are very, very strong when put against each other to the point of almost being equal, with an Orc's Hardiness passive having a 30% chance to resist every stun in the game being really good, which in case you forgot, each race has a baseline 5% chance to resist a stun, and it stacks with the racial. An Orc's Blood Fury scales with the gear that the rogue has, and just gets better and better the more gear the rogue gets, making this one of the best cooldowns in the game for a melee character. With Trolls having Berserking, it's also a very strong melee ability since it makes them attack that much faster. Beast Lane plays a minor part in raids later on, regeneration can help them but it's very minor, and bow specialization with throwing specialization don't really make a difference since they're a melee character. Undead, on the other hand, still have Will of the Forsaken, and since that's basically a trinket, it allows them to replace their insignia of the Horde with another trinket instead for more PvP power. Cannibalize can help them get some resource back and then re-stealth after, and save them a bandage. Shadow Resistance can possibly have a part to play in PvP since Rogue versus Warlock is quite common, and being able to resist shadow magic can be strong. All three of these races are so close that there really isn't a best to play, as an Orc's Hardiness might proc quite a lot and make them better than a Rogue's Will of the Forsaken, and with their Blood Fury, this could make you unstoppable. Trolls and their Berserking makes them pretty close to Orcs in PvE content, and Undead having Will of the Forsaken makes them very strong for PvP. But an Orc's Hardiness having a 30% chance to proc for all stuns might pay off more often than having a single use with a small after effect. For both PvP and PvE, I think it's fair to say all three of these races are so close, it's basically equal in power. For players who want to use the power of water and earth to heal and damage, we have the Shaman. This class is Horde exclusive, and Orcs, Trolls, and Tauren can all be one. And well, the reason why Trolls are the best PvE spellcasters also applies here as well with their Berserking, while all the other racials that Trolls got don't really offer anything worthwhile. For PvP, Orcs are simply the best because of hardiness, and being a healer or damage caster, potentially being able to fully ignore a stun effect is huge. Tauren lacks anything that's worth it for both PvP and PvE. Even with their endurance racial, it only increases their health by 500 points, which isn't that much. The Horde-Warlock is playable by both Orcs and Undead, with both of them bringing their own situational racials to the group. For Warlocks on the Horde side, they gain an advantage by playing Horde because of the benefits that the Shamans provide. Shamans give Mana Spring Totem, Tranquil Air Totem, and Mana Tide Totem, assuming the Shaman has it. This isn't as common for PvE, however, because totems are stuck to only giving the benefits to the members of the group where the Shaman is. This means that if there aren't enough Shamans in the raid, they will be focusing on buffing the melee group instead of the casters, since Wind Fury provides that much more to the melee. This also means that Warlocks will gain threat far faster than they otherwise would, and have to stop doing some damage to let them drop threat. With that being said, looking at the races, when it comes to Orc Warlocks, they don't really have any notable racials for Warlocks in PvE content. The only thing Orcs have that makes just a tiny difference is their command racial. But this is dependent on what build you're running, as Warlocks have 4 good ones to play with various types of plays. Warlocks may be having the largest variety of builds available compared to other classes. Their Affliction tree focusing on shadow damage, their Demonology focusing on either sacrificing a demon to gain 1 buff, or having one summoned to gain another for the pet and Warlock, and Destruction to increase crit damage, and the possibility to increase fire damage, leading to working with the Succubus summon to increase all damage dealt by 10%, or Sacrifice to increase only shadow damage by 15%, the Imp summon to reduce threat caused by 20%, and give health bonus to your party, or Sacrifice to increase your fire damage by 15%. So, depending on which combo of the 2 trees you take, you can get a very separate combo. So of course, some of the builds would gain a good benefit from this, while others would not. Whereas with Undead Warlocks, the racial obviously doesn't provide any damage buffs to pets, but as you may have guessed it, the Will of Forsaken is very strong, as there are quite a few bosses vanilla that use AoE fears throughout the fight. Now when this does happen, it lets the Undead Warlock use the Will of Forsaken and skip the mechanic and keep doing damage, while their Orc counterparts might be stuck dealing with the mechanic instead. With the faster these mechanics are dealt with and the bosses get killed, the more value is added to Will of Forsaken, increasing an Undead Warlock's overall damage output. And with the Undead's Shadow Resistance racial, it only plays a tiny part in PvE combat, but does help just that much more in some raids, like when a Warlock has to tank Emperor Veclor in Encourage. Speaking overall, Undead Warlocks are just a tiny bit better, seeing as sacrificing your pet is more favorable and a common build to play with, along with being able to skip fear mechanics and doing more damage. Now this isn't to say Orc Warlocks are bad, because they aren't by any means. It's just Undead Warlocks having that tiny advantage over Orcs, more consistently speaking, as if you're not playing with a pet, then Orcs offer absolutely nothing with the racials. Although, another benefit that Undead have over Orcs specifically for Warlocks only, is Warlocks are the only class who can change health into mana, allowing the Undead after combat to spam life tap till they're almost dead, and then consume a nearby body in order to fill some of their health bar back. But since Vanilla's Cannibalize doesn't actually heal for very much, only 35% of your maximum health, even this is only a situational benefit. And finally, we have the Horde Warriors. As with Alliance, every race on Horde can play a warrior. Horde Warriors have quite a big benefit of being able to raid with Shamans as well, which allows them access to Wind Fury Totem, which gives them a chance to swing in extra time for more damage, and this allows Warriors to use Hamstring to trigger their auto attacks to proc Wind Fury, for even more damage. With all of the races being so close to one another, which one is the best? Well, for a DPS warrior that wants to PvE, this goes to Orcs. This is because Blood Fury grants melee DPS so much power, and even though their axe specialization doesn't matter endgame, as most of the best in slot items are swords, this does play a small part while leveling up. However, for a warrior who wants to be a tank, the Trolls are actually better. This is because the Berserking ratio allows them to use Heroic Strike 2 more times in their opening rotation, which not only helps them keep aggro, but it gives them quite a big damage boost. For PvP, Orcs are still a top tier pick because of just how strong hardiness really is. Tauren are also a decent pick behind Orcs because Blizzard gave Tauren's melee range a tiny bit more range, along with an increased hitbox size, and their War Stomp gives them just that much more crowd control, which could allow the warrior to retaliate and potentially kill the person attacking them. The Undead having Will of the Forsaken is powerful as expected, but other than that, they don't offer much PvP-wise for warriors, and it can be argued that the Orcs having the consistency of hardiness, especially in PvP situations, just makes them the overall better choice for PvP. Although in PvE, having access to Will of Forsaken as a tank can be useful in the same way as Fear Ward is for Alliance, so it is sometimes picked up for that. Now, it goes without saying that this is looking at all the classes and seeing what race fits them as a hardcore perspective. The differences between the races is noticeable and can give you an advantage, But should you choose what race you want purely on aesthetics alone, and not necessarily what is overall the best, then you won't really be hampered by any race class combo.